How do you know if your partner is the one? On YouTube, there are lots of litmus test type questions floating around, like, is your partner your best friend? Many of these questions seem very intuitive. But what does the science say? In psychological research, we often see that many things are very intuitive at first glance, and when you tell people the findings of psychological research, they say, oh duh, yeah, that makes sense. But when you ask people in advance to predict the outcomes of studies, they are actually not that good at it. Because everything in psychology seems intuitive, and we all have experience with relationships, everybody thinks that they are an expert, but few people rely on objective scientific evidence to make their claims. So let's look at what the science says about how to evaluate the quality of a romantic relationship. Some of the strongest evidence we have to answer this question comes from a huge meta-analysis of 43 studies titled "Machine Learning Uncovers the Most Robust Self-Report Predictors of Relationship Quality Across 43 Longitudinal Couples Studies." Now, before I tell you the outcomes and you say, oh duh, that makes sense, here are some questions that are very popular online but did not turn out to be very good questions. If someone told you you're a lot like your partner, would this be a compliment? The problem with this is that you are not your partner, and most research finds that similarities are very sought after but actually not very important. So we often seek people that are like us, but we see in research that similarities don't predict good relationship outcomes. They're fine, they're not negative, but they're also not very positive. You can be with a partner that's completely different from you, and that can be completely fine. In fact, to a large extent, a masculine man and a feminine woman are expected to be very different. The second very common question to evaluate relationship quality online is your partner your best friend? And we see in research that it's actually precisely the qualities in a relationship that separate a friend from a romantic partner that are most important for relationship quality in a romantic relationship. So with that out of the way, here are the top 5 questions to ask yourself to evaluate if your current relationship is strong and built to last. Question number 1. Is there intimacy, trust, emotional responsiveness, and love? I grouped a bunch of questions together here because they're all very similar, and they're all about intimacy. Intimacy was the #1 predictor of relationship quality and commitment in this study of 43 studies. Note that intimacy here refers to emotional intimacy, not necessarily sexual intimacy, which we'll go into in a moment. Emotional intimacy and love are essentially what separate a good friend from a romantic partner. So it's precisely the separation between a friend and a partner that is most important in a partner, which means that you are not looking for a friend, you are looking for a lover. Of course, your lover can also be your best friend, and that would be great, but it is not the most important thing. I think it's very important in a relationship to evaluate what you can realistically get from your partner, and if you can get everything from your partner, that's great, but that is often not realistic. So there are a lot of things that you can get from your friends, from your colleagues, from your business partners, and those things, therefore, you don't need to seek from a romantic partner. But what you do need in a romantic partner is precisely the things you cannot get from your colleagues, or maybe not so easily, and that is basically romance. There's also some research that indicates that the more often couples touch each other, the better their relationship is. So a romantic relationship should first and foremost be characterized by romance. Now, this doesn't have to be true for everyone. Some people have a more business-type relationship. The Hormozis come to mind as being known for a relationship that is primarily built around their business and not necessarily warmth and intimacy, but I think they do actually have a very healthy relationship, or so it seems to me. And that seems to work for them. So clearly it's not necessary for everyone, but in general, a romantic relationship is first and most characterized by its romance. And romance here refers again to intimacy, trust, emotional responsiveness, and love, not necessarily passion. Passion ranked much, much lower, as we'll discuss in more detail in a moment. Emotional responsiveness, by the way, means that you respond to the emotional needs of your partner, something that many men can work on, myself included. For example, if your partner wants a hug, you give them a hug, and if your partner says, oh, I had this terrible thing happen to me, then you emotionally comfort them and you probably talk about it. Now, something specific for men, and that I personally learned, is that when women seek emotional comfort, they don't necessarily need a solution. I know that many men, myself included, when presented with a problem, they seek a solution. And that is not necessarily what women want, or people in general want. They want emotional comfort, and that can be very different. You don't necessarily need to provide a solution, and providing a solution doesn't necessarily provide emotional comfort. The second strongest predictor of relationship quality was appreciation. Do you feel lucky to have your partner? This question probably strongly relates to how well you match in mate value, because research finds that everyone essentially has a certain partner value in the partner market, which may seem cold to think about it that way, but that is objectively how partner selection works or how people act. And if you have very discrepant mate values, if one person has or is perceived to be as having a lot higher value for other people and a lot more alternatives compared to the other person, that can cause a lot of strife. So to use a boxing metaphor, you want a partner that is in your weight class. The third question to ask yourself if your relationship is good is the sex good? Sex is often seen as something that is more shallow and something that shouldn't be important, but we see very clearly in research that it is in fact important to predict long-term relationship outcomes, divorce rates, and strongly relationship satisfaction. Sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction very strongly correlate. Again, the principal thing that separates a romantic relationship from any other relationship is the romance and the things that come with that, which usually include sex. So if these things are not okay, then the romantic relationship is probably not on the surest footing. Now, some people might be completely fine having a largely platonic relationship, but in research we see strong connections between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. Importantly though, the objective frequency of sex was still quite important, but not nearly as important as the overall satisfaction. Passion, similarly, was not nearly as important as sexual satisfaction. For example, some couples plan when they have sex. Wednesday at 7 p.m. we're going to have sex, or at least try. That may not sound very romantic, but it can actually work very well for a lot of people, especially if you don't see each other that much. Moreover, it's normal that the rough passion that you may have at the start of a relationship to an extent fades over time. And just as a very rough reference, many couples in healthy relationships have sex 2 or more times per week, and sexual frequencies below 1 time per week can be problematic. Again, this doesn't necessarily have to apply to your current relationship, but it is something to consider. Question number 4. Is your partner committed and satisfied? To a large extent, this is up to you. If you are a good partner, of course your partner is going to be more satisfied and more committed. However, you also need to know that your partner is ready to invest in a long-term relationship. If you want to have kids, probably they also need to want to have kids, and you need to want similar things in life. If you are not committed and invested in the same long-term life outcomes, then that is going to probably create problems in the long term. Many women have found out the hard way that being with a man that is not committed to a long-term relationship can be very problematic. So make sure you're committed to the same life goals. Question number 5. More obvious, but something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, is simply how often do you fight? The more often couples fight, the worse their relationship tends to be. In Hollywood, we often see the fight and make up love dynamic, but in research we see that more arguments is simply a predictor of a worse relationship. We do see that how you fight, communication style, and conflict resolution are very important mediators, but generally, more arguments is simply a bad sign. So, to recap, these are the 5 questions to ask yourself if your relationship is healthy and strong. 1. Is there intimacy, trust, emotional responsiveness, and love? 2. Do you appreciate your partner? 3. Is the sex good? 4. Is your partner committed and satisfied? And 5. Do you fight a lot? I hope you appreciate this evidence-based information. If you like this type of content, I'd be honored if you like and subscribe.